So welcome to the fourth webinar in our 8-webinar series. Again, we're going over the Systems Change Toolkit. So this week, again, like I said, we're going to talk about meeting number 4. Last week we talked about the components of a housing crisis response system, and this week we're going to talk about how those components fit together and what ideally we want to see the housing crisis response system look like. The National Alliance to End Homelessness and I believe HUD have recently released a new housing crisis response system map. However, I have not been able to obtain it yet. I'm waiting for them to release it, and I'll add it to this file in the Google Drive. And while I'm at it, let me share this with you guys. I'm going to put the link in the chat for you if anybody wants to follow along and you don't have it. So like I said, last week we focused on the components of a housing crisis response system, and this week we're focusing on how all those pieces play together. So when somebody presents, wherever it may be that they present, and ideally you guys are thinking of natural points of entry, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a housing provider. It could be the hospital, it could be the jail. But what you're trying to show is how people are ultimately connected with housing resources. So I'll show you examples that we've seen with other communities. So what you're going to do in this meeting is you're going to do an overview of the last meeting, right? We talked about the components, what is rapid rehousing, what is street outreach, all that stuff. We mapped the components of the system that we have. So we identified what projects we have under each component type. And then this week, we're going to do an analysis of what the relationship looks like between all those different components. So you'll see here, there is a meeting number for, what is it called? Current Housing Crisis Response System Map Activity. Basically, what you guys are trying to do with this activity is to do exactly what Boston has done here and what Houston has done here, right? What we are indicating is basically what the current system looks like, right? People present at all of these places, 211 United Way, they do walk-ins, they present at DV providers, and then we try to connect them with a multitude of resources, and people often jump among those resources, and then some get into permanent housing, some disappear. So what we want to show is basically the relationship between all of our projects. So you're going to facilitate this activity, right? So the first piece is identify where all households are presenting from. You can use HMIS data as an example. So for example, we have a lot of people that are presenting from their own housing. We have a lot of people that are staying with family and friends. We have people that are presenting at jails, that are coming from street outreach, where have you. You guys, I think a lot of you have a good sense of where people are coming from. And then what you're going to do is for each of those boxes of where people are presenting from, what is our suspected path of how they get connected with housing resources, right? So maybe we require them to go to the emergency shelter, so you'll create a linkage with the shelter. Maybe we also provide them with referrals to other services, and so we want to show ultimately all those different linkages, and then ultimately like the final destination of where people end up in permanent housing. Does that make sense? It's pretty straightforward. Has any community done this before? I know in Austin they did it right before okay, good. So you've kind of done it in Corpus. Thanks, Alexis. John, for your veterans. So that's great. So, and that's a really great step, right? Basically what you're doing is what is the process from the client's or the participant's perspective of when they end up in homelessness, how do they eventually get to housing? So that's really great, and I promise that there's a purpose for this. There are a lot of purposes for everything, but a huge purpose is to identify that it's not as streamlined and coordinated as we want to be, and I know we all know this, but sometimes you just need like a picture, right? Like the Houston and the Boston pictures are alarming, right? Is anybody else looking at this and being like, oh, that looks great? Like if I were homeless, I could definitely manage this. Like I could figure out how to get myself housing. I know I feel like I wouldn't be able to even figure that out. So the purpose of this is to show ultimately what our current system looks like, and then to contrast it with what a unified system looks like, right? So you're going to do the activity. So just a word of advice, the time that I put in here, it's obviously going to vary. So this activity may not take 30 minutes. If it takes less, great. If it takes more, great. It's intended to be flexible. But then what you're going to do is do an assessment. So you're going to assess this relationship, right? So you're going to you're going to look at the map that you guys have created, and you're going to talk about basically what does it mean to be a unified system? Like, would you, in looking at this, would you say that this is a unified system? The suggestion that we have is that when you ask what words come to mind when people say a unified system, or what are your feelings around this, like honestly, when I look at those maps, I feel a lot of anxiety because it's a lot. So make sure that you're writing down that information. And then what you do is you're going to contrast that analysis with what the housing crisis response system is supposed to look like, right? So this is what ideally our system is supposed to look like. This is what we're moving towards, right? So we need to have an analysis of the current state, and then we need to also know what is our end goal. How do we want this to look? And this is what we're looking at, this housing crisis response system map. This was based off of the Supportive Services for Veterans Families presentation that they did in the East Coast recently, and I think it does a really great job of explaining how people connect with the system, and ultimately how with certain populations we can target specific resources for them, right? So the intention, guys, for coordinated entry is that everybody experiencing a housing crisis goes through coordinated entry, right? Coordinated entry is a piece of the housing crisis response system. So, and what I mean by housing crisis is that both people who need homelessness prevention resources, so they're at risk, but also people who are currently homeless go through coordinated entry. We'll go over this more later, but we have not identified a tool for the homelessness prevention piece yet, and how to prioritize people experiencing or at risk of experiencing homelessness. And so that piece of the coordinated entry system has not been built yet. We are just focusing right now on people who are literally homeless and those fleeing domestic violence. That'll come later, but I just wanted you guys to be aware of this, right? So this ideally is what our system is going to look like. And so during this analysis of what our system looks like, you're going to show that. And then you're also going to complete this measuring progress towards developing a housing crisis response system. This is based off of 100,000 Homes, has this primer, what are the best communities doing differently to end homelessness? And so this is actually taken from 100,000 Homes campaign, but this, I believe, is based on some of the things that they identify here. And so what you're going to do is, as a group, you're going to go through these different components. So for example, the first one, a decision-making body with the authority to coordinate and integrate your community's entire homeless service system. For example, there are not 6 different planning entities working to end homelessness. For those of you in attendance, how would you answer this? Yes, that's partially the case. No, that's not the case, or we're unsure. And when I say authority, that means that everybody in your housing crisis response system has given that responsibility and that power, I guess, for lack of a better word, or authority to an entity to help with planning, right? They help with these other activities that are going to be listed here. So does anybody want to share where they think their community would fall along that spectrum? Okay, I'm just going to move on. So it's going through different components. There's 16 total. What you're going to do at the end. Okay, So would you say no then for this one? Right, because there's not an entity. Yes that you would say no, or yes that you would say yes? Okay, so yes that he would say no. Sorry, I'm not gonna say who it is, but so the person that has participated, thank you for participating, has said that they would answer no to this. So what you'll see here is there's 3 different opportunities, 3 different data points, right? So one is a baseline, so that is this meeting, right? We're going to do a baseline of where we feel we fall as a unified system. In 30 days, hopefully, we have made progress in this, so our score hopefully is going up. In 60 days, hopefully we're making more progress and the score is going up. In 100 days, the score is going up. And you can continue doing this, right? I really think this is a really great tool to help people get a really good idea of what it means to be a unified system. I think the housing crisis response system map is one because it's a picture, right? It helps you guys see what it is when I say what it means to end homelessness and what a housing crisis response system is and how all the components fit together. It gives you that visual representation. You can see it. And I think some of you may also, in seeing that, may also have ideas about how things need to change, right? Would anybody say that? Yes, so I got a lot of yeses, right? So great, this is what we're trying to do with this systems change toolkit, is to get you guys seeing what the best practices are and to start to also be educated. I know you guys don't have a lot of time. Part of what I do is I read everything. I try to read everything that's available. I should show you guys my desk. I'll show you guys my desk. It's terrible. That's everything I need to read. That's another stack right there. So part of what I do is reading this material so I can provide it to you guys. Thanks, Alexis. So that I can provide it to you guys. And so that's great. I'm glad to hear that you guys, in seeing this, have ideas on how things need to change, because that's the purpose of the toolkit, is to walk you along this path to see, oh, that's how it's supposed to be. Oh, well, these are the things that we need to work on. And this'll come into play during meeting 7, when you guys talk about your aim statement, which is your goal. What is it that you want to change? And also those things that you need to, your aim statement, which is your goal, and then you're going to figure out your drivers, which are those things that you need to change in order to meet your goal, right? And then you'll work on them for 100 days and move forward. So that's the purpose of, the purpose of this meeting, again, is to go through what the housing crisis response system looks like and to do that analysis of, this is what ours looks like, this is ideally what it should look like, now let's continue this adventure, right? So what you'll then do is you'll wrap up, talk about the next meeting, there are pre-meeting materials, and then remind everybody that the qualitative assessment tools are due at the next meeting. And the reason that's the case is that I'm going to help you guys with the analysis of the qualitative assessment tools. Just so you know, in Texarkana, Lisa, who is a VISTA focusing on coordinated entry and coalition building, she just sent out the executive directors and community leaders, or her supervisor just sent out the appropriate qualitative assessment tool to community leaders and executive directors to have them submit at their next local homeless coalition meeting. So I'm really excited to see the outcomes of those qualitative assessment tools. And they're really, just so you know why we are suggesting that you have people do them, is they identify three different stakeholder groups within the community, such as people with lived experience, people on the direct front lines of ending homelessness, and then also community leaders and executive directors. And it's intended to give the perspective of the housing crisis response system from those 3 groups. And what we've seen across the country is that the perception of the housing crisis response system differs greatly depending on what group you're looking at. So I'm interested and excited to see the outcomes of that. I'm a data nerd, so I can't wait. So for meeting 5, what's going to happen is you guys are going to, so this is when you're going to start the deep dive into how projects operate, right? How, for example, your Salvation Army or your local emergency shelter or your local rapid rehousing provider, how they are implementing their project and whether or not it's being implemented according to best practices. It's going to be heavy. So the prep materials is to read about the best practices in the different components of the housing crisis response system. So there's that. So I wanted to prep you guys on that. Does anybody have any questions about anything? I don't have anything else. I will see you guys next week, same day of the week, same time, and I look forward to it. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Great rest of your week, y'all.